Have you ever stopped to imagine what life was truly like for those who lived closest to queens and royalty hundreds of years ago? We're often fed images of glittering crowns, dazzling jewels, and magnificent feasts fit for a fairy tale. But here's the shocking truth. Behind those towering palace walls, life was anything but glamorous. The royal courts of the medieval era, the Victorian era, and even other points in history were not the elegant, sparkling worlds you think. They were cesspools of filth, suffocating stench, and constant danger. Places where a single mistake could cost you your life. And who bore the brunt of this hidden misery? The very people who serve the queens closest, their loyal servants. Today, we're tearing down the curtain of royal perfection and exposing the disturbing reality that history rarely dares to tell. Brace yourself, because what you're about to hear will shatter every fairy tale fantasy you've ever had about queens and their courts. This is going to get dark and downright disturbing. If you're imagining sweet-smelling perfumes and glittering bathtubs of rosewater, think again. Hygiene standards in the past were almost non-existent. In the medieval era, bathing was considered suspicious by many. People believed that bathing in warm water opened up the pores, allowing disease to seep into the body. So, queens, just like everyone else, might only bathe once every few months, if that. Instead of bathing, they layered themselves with heavy perfumes, powders, and oils to mask the odor. Now imagine being the servant responsible for dressing them. You weren't just helping them into their gowns. You were dealing with weeks or months of sweat, grime, and unwashed skin. And the dresses? They were almost never washed. Servants were expected to scrape off the filth, brush away crumbs and dust, and make the gowns look presentable. Even by the Victorian era, things had only improved slightly. While the wealthy might bathe more often, maybe once or twice a week, indoor plumbing was still rare. Toilets, as we know them today, barely existed. Instead, queens and nobles used chamber pots, which are basically portable toilets kept in the bedroom. And who had to clean those out? The servants, multiple times a day. Can you picture waking up at dawn and carrying a pot full of human waste down the narrow staircases of a cold stone castle? That was your job. If you think your garbage can smells bad after a week, imagine the scent of a royal court where hundreds of people were packed together without proper sanitation. The air in a queen's chambers would be a mixture of stale sweat, unwashed hair, perfume, rotting food, and the chamber pot in the corner. Servants were constantly surrounded by this stench, and there was no escaping it. To make matters worse, servants often had to sleep in cramped quarters near kitchens or stables. The smell of smoke, animal manure, damp straw, spoiled food, and garbage would cling to their clothes and air. Some servants worked for so many years in these conditions that they lost their sense of smell entirely. And remember, this was before deodorant or toothpaste. Most people's breath was foul, and their bodies smelled even worse. Imagine having to lace up a queen's corset while standing inches away from a month-old sweat stain. Being a servant wasn't just degrading, it was often a death sentence. In an age when basic hygiene was almost non-existent, disease spread faster than rumors in a royal court. Servants were the ones tasked with handling the filth no one else would touch. Dirty laundry caked with sweat and blood, unwashed bedding crawling with vermin, and chamber pots brimming with waste. Every day meant direct contact with bodily fluids that could easily carry deadly illnesses. Smallpox, tuberculosis, and even the plague haunted the halls of noble estates, and servants were almost always the first to fall ill. They lived and worked in cramped quarters where sickness passed from one person to the next like wildfire. Parasites were everywhere. Lice, fleas, and bedbugs thrived in the folds of royal garments and mattresses. And if your queen or master had lice, it was your job to painstakingly remove them, all while risking the little monsters leaping straight into your own hair. Unlike their wealthy employers, servants had no real access to doctors or treatments. If they became sick or too weak to work, they were often left to suffer in silence. Many simply died, replaced as easily as one might replace a worn broom. Life as a servant wasn't just hard, it was dangerous from the moment you woke up to the moment you laid your head down, if you lived long enough to do so. Royal fashion might have dazzled the court, but for servants it was a living nightmare. Queens were expected to wear enormous gowns made from the finest silk, velvet, and intricate embroidery. These weren't just dresses, they were architectural feats. With layers upon layers of fabric, the outfits could weigh over 30 pounds, making them as cumbersome for servants as they were for the queens themselves. And here's the worst part. These garments were rarely, if ever, properly washed. Instead, servants had to painstakingly air them out, brush away dirt, and douse them with perfumes in a desperate attempt to mask the odor of sweat and decay. The situation with undergarments was even more disturbing. Queens might wear the same set for days, sometimes weeks, without changing. By the time a servant was allowed to remove them, they would often find angry rashes, festering sores, or infections caused by the sheer lack of cleanliness. Servants were expected to handle these soiled clothes with steady hands, even as the stench clung to them long after the work was done. Dressing a queen wasn't a quick affair either. Every button had to be fastened perfectly, every lace tightened just right, and every ribbon meticulously tied. One wrong move, one misaligned seam, could provoke the queen's fury, and that could mean punishment, humiliation, or even dismissal. For servants, the act of dressing royalty wasn't just tedious, it was a high-pressure test they had to pass every single day. Life as a servant wasn't just exhausting. It was absolute servitude. From the moment the sun rose until long after it set, your life revolved entirely around your queen's needs. There were no weekends, no holidays, and certainly no days off. Sleep was a luxury, and the meager wages you received barely kept you alive. Privacy that didn't exist. Your life was not your own. It belonged to her. If the queen called for you in the middle of the night, you came running, no matter how tired or sick you were. If she ordered you to hold the chamber pot while she relieved herself, you obeyed without flinching. There was no such thing as saying no, and the consequences for failure were brutal. A single mistake, a moment of hesitation, or a perceived slight could change your life instantly. Some servants were beaten as punishment, while others were dismissed without pay. For the poor, losing a position wasn't just humiliating. It could mean starvation, homelessness, or worse. The threat hung over you every second of the day. Obey or face ruin. In this world, loyalty wasn't a choice. It was survival. You might wonder, why didn't they just leave? But for most servants, the harsh reality was that life beyond the palace gates was even more brutal. Inside the palace, at the very least, they had a roof over their heads and something to eat, even if it was little more than stale bread or scraps from the royal table. Walking away meant facing a world where poverty, hunger, and homelessness were almost guaranteed. There were no safety nets, no charities ready to take them in. For many, the palace was the lesser of two evils, but that choice came at a devastating cost. Servants lived in constant exposure to filth and disease, their bodies battered by years of relentless labor. The endless lifting, scrubbing, bending, and hauling took its toll. Malnutrition weakened them further, making even minor illnesses deadly. Many never lived long enough to see old age. Their lives burned out quickly under the crushing weight of service. For those trapped in this cycle, the palace wasn't a place of grandeur. It was a gilded cage, one they could never truly escape. How did servants endure a life so harsh, so unforgiving? The truth is, many simply shut down parts of themselves to survive. Some carried small pouches of herbs, flowers, or scented cloths tucked into their sleeves or pockets to mask the stench of filth that clung to their daily work. Others found solace in one another, forming deep bonds with fellow servants who understood the same struggles. In a world where their voices didn't matter, these friendships became lifelines. small pockets of humanity in an otherwise merciless existence. But even these coping methods could only dull the pain, not erase it. The reality was inescapable. Being a servant to a queen was one of the hardest, dirtiest, and most thankless jobs in history. It demanded total obedience, crushed individuality, and often claimed lives long before their time. For many, the only way forward was to endure each day and hope they'd survive the next. So, the next time you watch a movie with a glamorous queen strolling through a sparkling palace, remember the reality that history often hides. Behind her beauty and elegance stood an invisible army of servants. The ones emptying chamber pots in the dead of night, combing lice from her hair, scrubbing unwashed clothes, and enduring the filth so she could appear flawless before the world. It's easy to admire the royal life from afar, but would you have survived as a servant in those times? Could you have endured the endless labor, the constant fear of punishment, and the diseases lurking in every corner? Or would you have run the moment you were handed your first chamber pot? Tell me in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed uncovering these brutal, unspoken truths from history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. There's so much more from the past waiting to be revealed, and trust me, it only gets darker from here. Have you ever stopped to imagine what life was truly like for those who lived closest to queens and royalty hundreds of years ago?